President Muhammadu Buhari has approved $8.5 million for the immediate evacuation of at least 5,000 Nigerians fleeing Ukraine. Government officials say Air Peace and Max Air Airlines will provide 3 aircraft to run as many flights as possible. The evacuees include 940 from Romania, 150 from Slovakia, and 350 from Poland. Speaking on the flight to Warsaw this morning,
the President has graciously given us approval, along with the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, to do the best we can, to do the needful. In other words, to evacuate those Nigerians that are willing to come back home. I did inform Council that on the whole, we have some say about 7,100 Nigerians, a conservative estimate, both the registered and the unregistered. We assume that we have that number of Nigerians living there. But a good number of them being students who may have been caught up in this war in Ukraine. All these agencies are pooling resources to ensure that these aircraft leave today for these countries in order to evacuate our nationals from those countries. Let's go.
All right. Despite FG's provision of funds for the evacuation of Nigerians from Eastern Europe, the airlines were saddled with the logistics of sorting out landing permits. Arise correspondent Adefemi Akisoya spoke to Air Peace CEO Allen Oyema.
This is for my country, it's for the love of country, and Mr. President has determined that this should be done. And I think it's the right way to go to bring our fellow citizens back home from the strife that's going on in Eastern Europe. They need to be back home. They need to be back here for safety. So we need to do that. Whatever it takes. I think it's about 2 a.m. or whatever now. So I'm here to make sure everything goes well. So it's a thing of pride for me to do this for the nation.
Right. A lot to unpack this morning. Finally, evacuation flights have started. Dr. Bati?
Well, some of the things to unpack will include the following. 1, yesterday, the General Assembly of the United Nations took a vote, a resolution on the situation in Ukraine. And out of the 193 members, 141 members voted to condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think it was significant, considering the fact that at the National Security Council, Russia, China, more or less vetoed the decision of the Security Council, which again is an indication of the lack of equality or equity, if you like, within the United Nations Security Council. But to tie it to Nigeria, in terms of what happened yesterday, Nigeria, voted against Russia. And Nigeria's foreign policy process has always been, guided by what is called a non-aligned policy, because we were a member of the non-aligned movement. I think under Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, when he was talking of the concept of medium powers. So we had that non-aligned movement thing. And usually, the tradition in Nigeria's foreign policy process is to remain neutral in situations between the West and the East. So for the first time yesterday, we had that departure in terms of foreign policy choices. How somebody will come up later to come and explain to Nigerians, why there's that shift in foreign policy emphasis. That's one leg of it on the foreign policy front. The second one has to do with the efforts of the federal government to evacuate Nigerians who are stranded in Eastern Europe in the event of the war between Russia and Ukraine. I think the president has done very well in releasing the funds. I think I mentioned this earlier in the week, that the president has already agreed to give the necessary approvals, and that has happened now. And you have 2 airlines that have been designated, Air Peace and Air Max. Air Peace did not leave early enough. By 2 a.m., you had Allen Onyema there, the chairman of Air Peace, saying they were still trying to get the necessary approvals. Well, I thought somebody dropped the ball there. It shouldn't have been the responsibility of the airline, perhaps. It probably should have been the responsibility of the Nigerian Civil Aviation Authority to make sure that everything was in place. But we understand that by this morning, the first aircraft to evacuate people is already on the ground. And Romania is being used as the main hub for evacuation. We hope that the movement from different parts of Ukraine has been secured and that people will be evacuated expeditiously. But 1,000, the target of evacuating 1,000 persons out of Ukraine, that's still very small, compared to the number of Nigerians that are in Ukraine. But that help will come, that feeding will be provided, that accommodation will be provided while they are in transit. It's a way for Nigeria to make up for dropping the ball, earlier in the event of this crisis. The third point that I would like to make has to do with the fact that there are also many Nigerians that remain stranded in Russia. I mean, I have a friend, a good friend, I don't want to mention his name, who has 3 children studying medicine in Sumy. Now, yesterday, the Indians were making the effort to link up with the Ukrainian authorities, with the Polish authorities, to create a humanitarian corridor, a safe corridor for Indians who are stranded in eastern Ukraine to be able to escape into neighboring countries. Because if they have to leave, then they will go into the theater of war. And that in itself is a problem. But there are Nigerians who are also there, about over 900 Nigerians who are students at the university in Sumy. Sumy is the name of the town. I'm correct in that regard. So maybe the Nigerian authorities also should find a way of following the example of India so that those young persons who have gone to Ukraine to study medicine, study computer science, study engineering, can also be part of that safe corridor. And they can benefit from this effort to airlift Nigerians out of that place. And many of the parents that I have spoken to, because I keep saying, and I've argued on the back page of this day, that this is not something that is distant. The war is right here at our doorstep. Because there are people who have 3 children there. There are people who have 5 children there who are going to school because they can't get good education for their children inside Nigeria. So they've had to send them to Ukraine, or because they think, well, there are better opportunities elsewhere. Nigeria should not forsake them. President Buhari has shown that he cares about those persons, whether they are children or they are adults, and they should be given the opportunity. Final point. We've been told that the only Nigerians who can be ferried out of a war zone are those Nigerians who are registered with the embassies. And that those persons who are stranded there, they should quickly make sure that they finalize their registration. Well, I think that's too much of a condition in a war situation. Just get these people out. When they come here, they can come and sort out whatever it is. Okay, maybe they should adopt simple tests. There are 400 languages in Nigeria. If they can speak any one of them, just take them out. To say they should go and do registration. How would they get to the embassy? What kind of documentation would they do? These are persons who are already internally displaced persons in a foreign land. Finally, I think it's a good thing that the Nigerian government says they will not be required to provide their proof of vaccination when they come back. But when they come back, they will need to do a compulsory PCR test. I think that's reasonable. But this condition about you have to register, you must have evidence of documentation. How many Nigerians go abroad and they are documented? I'm sure half of the people in Ukraine have no documentation. Once they can just justify the fact that they are Nigerians, please bring them home. When we get here, we can sort out the other details.
I mean, very well said, Dr. Abati. Truth has to be said. I'd like to piggyback on the first point you made as regards Nigeria at the UN yesterday voting with America, with the West, when we have, we have trade dealings with Russia. And that reminds me of the Ajaokuta steel plant case, that the Russians started in the 70s, They said they had gone 98% as regards completion of that project in 86. Coups, squabbles and everything, delayed that project again. 94, we tried giving that project to another person. We've gone through the whole gamut. They tried giving the project to another company, I think an American or an Indian company who came in the mix. Finally, we are back to giving that project to the Russia. How will that affect the Ajaokuta project? That's another question on the front burner that we need to ask based on the decision we have made yesterday. Because this definitely will come up when we start to talk to Russia again, when all of this settles, about Ajaokuta and about development. Second point, some Nigerians don't want to come back. That's another part of this. In fact, I got a call yesterday from a Nigerian that was out there in Ukraine and that was out there in Romania, in Hungary, and what he was asking for was how he can transfer his studies to Hungary and complete his education, because he feels coming to Nigeria back, what will I be doing? There's no place I can start off from as he's on strike and other problems and things like that. So a lot of them are thinking in those countries they are in, if they can stay back and transfer their study there. That's another possibility. For those that want to come back, I mean, like you said, right, Dr. Bati, the only thing should be their Nigerian passports to help them get on that flight. Thirdly, the role of money. There are a lot of people that are cash-strapped. They don't have money. I can tell you for free, most of those people in Sumi don't have money to even make the move in the first place. Banks, ATM, and the likes are closed. How can we get money out to them? Because that's another very important priority. And that's the reason why a lot of them can't make the move. It's not that they don't want to leave and all of that. Even those that left from places like Kharkiv and Kiev and some other areas like that, some of them still owe debts today that they had to borrow money. All right.
Although the university in Sumi has been doing very well, they've been providing their students with food, eggs, live chickens. I've seen the pictures of those live chickens that the children have been sending to me. But okay, it's a war situation. Whatever the country can do, whatever the world can do, will be helpful.
Right. All right, welcome back to the morning show right here on the Rise News channel. Well, before we go to the papers, Michael Wilson joins us from Cape Town, South Africa for Global Business Update. Great to have you, Michael. Pleasure talking to you.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Slightly later than you, but always good to be with you, Rafai, as you know. So Asia Pacific, let's look at that first of all, and slightly higher. What Asia Pacific seems to be doing is being quite resilient as far as all the uncertainties are concerned. But one thing I think that helped them very, very slightly was the fact that when Jay Powell, I'll come on to this later on, but when Jay Powell actually spoke, he said that, an interest rate rise was likely. He favours 0.25% rather than 0.5%. And that seems to have been adding a bit of help to the markets quite overall, really, and certainly as Europe's opened today. Oil prices, of course, continuing to surge, as you'd imagine. Mainland Chinese stocks mixed. Shanghai Composite up very, very slightly. Chinese services growing in February. Australia is saying that although it would very much like to, it cannot hope to give all the coal that Poland, for example, wants. Poland relies almost exclusively on coal for its electricity. And of course, because of the Russia sanctions, it's not getting that coal, doesn't particularly want to get that coal. But Australia probably doesn't actually want to, wants to do it, but doesn't feel as though it has the capacity to do it. China is saying for its part, it will not join sanctions against Russia. It's continuing to go its own way. China is the world's second largest consumer of corn, but most of that is coming from its internal supply. So it's not really being hit heavily as far as its domestic demand at the moment, as far as sanctions on Russia are concerned. Let's turn to the United States, and stock futures inched a little lower as Russia-Ukraine tensions came about. You would expect that, really, wouldn't you? I mean, the market's been very, very volatile indeed. I mean, the Dow yesterday advanced about 600 points, having fallen earlier in the week, at least that amount. Jay Powell, in his testimony to Congress, has been talking about interest rate rises. It's pretty much nailed on now, I think. But it's a question of whether it's 0.5% or 0.25%. And from what the markets are taking, given that the bank is under pressure to do something and rein in inflation, it looks like it just will be 0.25%. 0.25%, but it's a first rise for quite some time. The big corporates are ganging up against Russia now. Apple's the latest, shuttering its stores in Russia, not doing business with Russia. Nike too, and also H&M, and Apple also has given the date of its big event, which is now March the 8th, and we expect to see a new iPad and a new iPhone, a cheaper sort of iPhone. If you're interested in that sort of in that sort of thing, it's going to be called Peak Performance, the actual the event itself. So we'll get a peek at some of their new products when it actually happens. Amazon is exiting some of its bricks and mortar businesses. It's continuing to experiment with retail, but it's shuttering some of its stores. It's closing all its Amazon Amazon bookshops in the United States, and also in the UK. But it's still going, and it's also boosting Ukraine's cybersecurity operations, it says as well. So it's giving a lot of help to Ukraine as well. NetBlocks, this is a company which tracks internal disruptions and shutdowns, says attacks on defence, foreign and internal affairs have risen since Ukraine came under physical attack. EU Eurozone inflation, talking about with Reuters about this in an hour now, 5.8%, really gangs up against the internal debate within the ECB about what to do about interest rates. They meet next week, so we'll know a little bit more about it then. Sberbank, I think it's how you pronounce it, Russian bank in the city. Shares lost 95% yesterday. It's Europe's largest lender, and it's got various subsidiaries, and so there've been what it describes as abnormal cash flows out of it, so that's what we've seen. And European Central Bank ordered the closure of its subsidiaries. Sorry about this slight hesitation. I'm having a difficulty with the Wi-Fi at the moment. I don't think it's anything to do with the Ukraine. FTSE Russia and MSCI, both those very important indexes, have now moved out of Russian equities. What they're saying is, I've rarely heard this phrase before, that Russia is now almost uninvestable. That's quite a big phrase for them to use. You will have heard already that the Russian oligarch Roman Abramovich says he'll sell Chelsea. People are lining up to buy it. Cost is the Chelsea Football Club, by the way, £3 billion. He's become under a lot of pressure to reduce his exposure to and his interest in Russian commercial assets. And the UK itself is eyeing up possible property of oligarchs to seize those, and also therefore to house Ukrainians in them who are fleeing the conflict. But again, the government's been warned by lawyers that this may actually affect fundamental UK property laws. Oil and gold, really, much as you'd absolutely expect. OPEC decided to do absolutely nothing, and Ukraine finally has been accepting cryptos of all shapes and sizes to help it with its struggle against Russia. That is the global view this morning.
Right. Thank you so much, Michael, as always. The first question will be the inflation that will come about as a result of the war in Ukraine. Is the world ready for it? And I ask this because prior to the war, in April, there was supposed to be some rate rise in the UK. National insurance was supposed to go up. As we speak, gas prices gone up, petrol prices gone up. 150, 160 it is. It might go up to 170, 180. There are problems here and there. So is the world ready to cushion the effect of this? And secondly, what will be the effect on the balance sheet of tech companies like Amazon now having to bolster their cybersecurity as regards what's happening in Ukraine?
Okay, first of all, I think what you're hinting at is absolutely the way to suspect this is going to happen. We're talking about stagflation, aren't we? Really, we're talking about how it's happened often in the past. Governments, central banks are forced with this dilemma. They've got rising inflation. Recovery is not really happening in the way they would like to see it. So what do? Do they raise interest rates? Because stagflation is something you do not want to have happening, which effectively means low growth and high inflation. And so it's really a question of balancing that. I suspect that probably, and we get another indication of this from the ECB next week when they meet, because they have similar sorts of problems as well. As I said to you, that really high rate of inflation in Europe. So we're going to see a lot of how these central banks actually handle things as well. Fed, Bank of England, and the ECB. So shall we register that thought? Very, very good one indeed. Should we keep it in the back of our minds and then really see if we can cope with it next week? As far as Amazon's concerned, isn't it interesting how these multinationals now want to get involved in this conflict? I suspect they have a pretty eagle eye on their balance sheets as well, but it does no harm to a company's credibility and to its support from shareholders and stakeholders to be taking a stance like this. And I don't know how Amazon plans to do it, but if it can help with cybersecurity, security of Ukraine, then I think that's something that we all be, because we're clearly in these kind of asymmetric wars now. If the military doesn't work, we're all going to be subject to cybersecurity breaches, and it's very important that we have that kind of protection. But you're absolutely right. How they actually manage that will be a deft sort of corporate footsie game, if you like.
Three quick things. One, how costly are these sanctions? We've been told that, I think it was the Guardian of the UK this morning, saying that the GDP of Russia is going to suffer by about 7%. There's not only Russia that would bear the crunch. Europe is suffering. We're even feeling the effect here already in Africa with regard to the cost of wheat and other commodities. And of course, Europe is also going to suffer. Ukraine will be devastated. But has anyone made an attempt to measure the cost? And for how long can those sanctions last? Everybody is pulling out. Even people selling clothes and trousers are pulling out of Russia. That's the first one. The second one, IMF, World Bank, they are promising Ukraine $5.2 billion to assist Ukraine. How far can that also go? And then finally, since we last spoke, President Biden has given his State of the Union address. The whole of that State of the Union address, what do you think of it? He seemed to have dealt too heavily on Putin. Putin seems to be the cause of every problem in America and in the rest of the world. What do you think?
I have to say that I don't normally watch a State of the Union address, because it seems to me that people stand up and applaud and sit down again, and stand up and applaud and sit down again. It's a bit of a pantomime. And quite honestly, the response that he got by saying that that Russia would be facing further sanctions, I mean, it's showmanship. Basically, it's exactly what the United States doesn't want, but he has to say these things because he's going for his midterm elections. As far as calculating GDP effects are concerned, I'm sure that you are too. I don't have to do this kind of thing, and I'm pretty sure that you're pretty glad that you don't either. How they do it, I just do not know. All I know is that there will be conflicting supply chains, and the people who will be paying for that in the end are you and me, the consumers, rather than the multinationals, because they will try to pass it on. It's not a given, but I suspect that what will happen with this hole that Russia and sanctions against Russia is creating is it'll take a long while to actually work out and find out where this GDP. These kind of predictions right now within this are not really worth the paper they're written on, simply because this war itself has not unraveled. There may well be negotiations, there might not be negotiations. Who knows what else has to happen? But I'll say this, that it does look as though, and it looks as though, the United States, Europe, the UK, and other developed nations are actually taking quite a firm stand about energy sanctions, which they've not done before. I think when those start to bite, then we can start making some worrying calculations about how it's going to affect countries' GDPs. I don't see how you do it right now.
We're asked about support for Ukraine, $5.2 billion coming from the Bretton Woods institutions.
Well, I mean, so against their GDP, what is that? It'll be a tiny amount, and how will they spend it? The IMF is forced to do things like this because that's why it was set up, International Monetary Fund, and I hope that it doesn't have the sort of destructive, strangulatory strings attached to its loans, if they be loans, or its preferred borrowing, whatever it may be. You know, nobody knows what kind of money this will actually be. I think that Ukraine needs to be given a chance, but again, it's very, very early days yet. I would expect the IMF to say that they may have to modify those sums later on when we understand the full extent of the kind of damage, and indeed Ukraine's future as a whole.
Well, thank you very much, Michael Wilson. Thank you very much indeed. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow morning.